Here we go. All right. Boom. That's what Chris Holmes does. Does this move.
Boom.
Boom. Boom. Here we go. Live on the Metal Voice. Yeah, we are pure live today. It's not just so everybody knows, this is not a sort of video live, a premiere. It is live. We're live. Like you could pinch me, I will yell live. Okay? And spoiler alert, Alan.
We've been dying. We had to wait until today.
That's right.
To make
embargo.
Review.
Muzzled. That's what we were. We're muzzled. As I was reading, it's tough for me to read now. I mean, I'm part of this disposable society of maybe like 30 seconds I can read now. I don't know. I'm part of this horrible attention span, but you know what? I got through it. Thick book.
Hachette Books comes out today. Biblical. Rob Halford's Heavy Metal Scriptures.
Look at that.
What a great.
Look at it.
What a fantastic read. Highly recommend. End of review. See you tomorrow.
Merry Christmas. Okay. Alan, I'm warming my hands up. So get ready for this.
He's no Pavarotti, Jim. He's no Pavarotti.
All right. Again, spoiler alert for all those people out there who want to read this. You may want to just listen for a bit and then just turn us off. Well, don't turn us off, but listen for a bit.
Well,
okay, how does this compare? I'm going to ask you the question. How does biblical compare to Confess, which was his first book?
That's two different things altogether, right? They're both well written. They're both interesting reads. One was an autobiography, obviously, of a very, very interesting life in Confess. Rob Halford's Confess. That's Hachette Books too. So, but this one really takes you like biblical scriptures all the way from how they got started, the early years of touring, hotel rooms, promoters, record companies, artwork. Everything that has to go into a band, he breaks down and takes it from like Psalms in the Bible, right? He breaks it down. Books, and then he breaks it down to Psalms. So
that's sort of the metaphorically way of sort of talking about this book. But I also look at it like a bands for dummies. Sort of like this is the ins and outs. This is the ins and outs of being in a band. And you said it. Everything from starting your band to getting on the label,
choosing the name,
choosing
song
the name,
titles, album
song titles, managers, media, social media. It goes on and on.
Conflict within the band.
Conflicts within the band. Leaving the band, coming back into the band, and retiring or not retiring from the band. So yeah, it's really cool. All right.
Oh no, it was like I loved it because you break it down like that. It's smaller chapters, easy to read, interesting reads, and the more I know about Rob Halford, the more I just like the guy and I find him interesting. Looking back in the day, Jim, I don't know about yourself. I'll ask you the question, but I'll give Rob was the one kind of lead singer that's always felt to me a little standoffish and a little bit unreachable, unapproachable would maybe be the word. Bruce was always a guy that's trying to speak in the native language wherever he is touring in the world. And Brian Johnson, you can't get more down to earth than him. Dee Snider was just crazy, but he was a heavy metal fan freak. But Rob always seemed, pretty serious guy, pretty, not too much talking on the stage. Then he'd go into a dance and you say, okay, he's kind of a normal guy there. He likes dancing and stuff. But I mean, he was just unapproachable, it seems to me, back in the day. And the more I learned and reading these books, like he says, he's just a regular Burke from Walsall, and you get that feeling. Not only is he a music fan, he's still a music fan. He remembers what it is like being a music fan, meeting your idols, going to the concerts, buying your tickets, queuing in line to get into the venue. He talks about this in this book, and he can relate to everything that any music fan has gone through. And a lot of his experiences that he describes in the book, I think 99.9% of bands have also lived through. So,
show yours, Alan. Pull these up a little bit. Because somebody wrote sword shirt. So there you go. These are the sword shirts we got.
Here.
Yeah, I know. I just got thrown off because somebody wrote Sword Shirt. So I figured, okay, what's better time to plug Sword?
But
Coming up on Thursday.
that's what I take away from the book. Not only is it an enjoyable read, but he's really a down to earth guy that's just a music fan at the end of the day. But he's no Pavarotti.
And he doesn't like the sound of his own voice, even though everybody loves his voice.
He doesn't understand why everybody makes a big fuss over him.
I will give a couple of spoilers, but not yet. This is what I love about this book compared to last book. I didn't like the last book so much, and I'll tell you why. Because for me, whenever I read these sort of autobiographies, I want to know about the music. I want to know the inside scoop of the music industry and what's going on. And this is just a personal thing for me. I'm kind of less concerned about, okay, in grade 6 I did this, in grade 7 I did that, in grade 11 I did this, and so forth, right? I'm not that interested. I don't mind a high level of that, right? Kind of where you grow up and your upbringing quickly, but I'm more interested in this, being in a band 101. Anybody who wants to start a band, anybody who wants to be, sort of break as a band, then definitely read this book, because it definitely gives you from start to sort of almost finish, right? Everything you have to deal with. And even when he's being even interviewers like ourselves, right? Like, what's he thinking of when we're interviewing him, or he's being interviewed by someone like us, right? Selfies, right?
Wrist merchants. I guess he would refer to as wrist merchants, which is not a positive connotation in a lot of the examples he gives in the book, but with a few exceptions like Jeff Barton, etc. I mean, he really the music press, he has a love-hate relationship with a lot of them. So
selfies. What does he think of selfies, right? When people tap him on the shoulder, hey, do a selfie for me, Rob.
His ears.
What I did notice, and here's a spoiler right now, so tune out for 30 seconds. Not much about Tim Ripper Owens and those Tim Ripper Owen years. Did you notice that? Just the only sort of mention he had with Tim Ripper was in regards to the Three Tremors, where he said, darn it, I should have trademarked that name, but I didn't. And it's all good, right? And I did ask him this question, what he thought about the Three Tremors a few years back. And he says he's okay with it. He's good with it. And all the luck to him.
Again, it's his relation, his experiences in a band. He wasn't in a band with Ripper, so I got no problem with that whatsoever. I mean, he does talk about bands changing and going through, and his period in the desert, his solo journeys in the desert until he came back into the fold. And
you know what I did like? So he's in Judas Priest and his big band playing arenas, and now suddenly he's in Fight, or as part of Halford, and now he's playing the little clubs, and he's thinking to himself, spoiler alert, what on earth did I do? You're playing the little clubs, you have nowhere to change, you got nowhere to get ready and
starting over.
That's right. And that's sort of the reality, right? And it humbled him, I think. And
I think Bruce might have gone through the same thing, right? That's what he alluded to.
Yeah. All right. So listen to this. So Perrin, our buddy Perrin, saying very often the second books are cash grabs. If you ask me, this book is better than the first one, because this is more the stuff that I personally like. And I'll just give everybody a high level. And I'm not even going to talk about the book. I'm just giving you a high level. It talks about lawyers, managers, being a songwriter, a live album, studio albums, recording, venues, different types of venues, roadies, hotels, the image of a band, the look of a band, signing stuff and people putting stuff on eBay, social media, online media, shooting videos, thoughts on Spotify, thoughts on KK, thoughts on we're a 4-piece, but everybody went crazy when they wanted to go out as a 4-piece a year ago, and now we're a 5-piece. So that's high level.
Heavy metal culture, the denim and leather, the inks and tats and the hair, anything that you ever wanted about heavy metal is in this book.
Yeah.
From his perspective, and really breaking down to the subculture of heavy metal and the fans and the very loyal and dedicated fans of heavy metal that he has enormous respect for. Obviously, they pay the bills at the end of the day. His favorite bands and performers, right?
Yeah. This is Rob Halford's book on how to make it as a rock star or a musician. Go ahead. Sorry, Alan. Go.
constant temptations of the rock and roll lifestyle. We got not only the pleasures of the flesh, but you've got the alcohol, the drugs, the rehabs, and like he said, a lot of the his story can be reflected by 90% of the bands from the day. So
Yeah, yeah. Here's some questions. How does it compare to Bruce's book? What would you prefer, this book or Bruce's book?
Bruce was an autobiography, right? This is more of a how-to book, like you said, Jim. If we're talking about this book, I preferred this book.
Yeah, me too. 100%. Bruce's book was vague and more sort of similar to Confess, where more of the life of the person versus more of being in the music industry. So Rob, if you're watching this show, and I know you are, thumbs up. It makes a nice stocking stuffer if you have big stockings to stuff it in. Is this book available in French? Est-ce que cet livre est disponible en français?
En français? Oh, Jim. Jimmy's...
Is it?
I don't
Is
know,
it available? Jim. I don't know, but I know it's released today, November 1st.
Probably not right away. Usually there's a delay, but I know Bruce's book was in French. So it's possible that this one will be down the road as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah. All right. How's everybody like our sword shirts?
We're going to do this how many times during the show, Jim?
All right. He talks about streaming services versus the traditional way of buying albums.
I'm not a big fan of Spotify.
Not a big fan of Spotify.
And we've heard that from different, people that we've interviewed over the last dozen years. A lot of them are like, please don't support these guys because we never get paid. We never see a cent. Don't buy online. Try to get it right from our record company or from our website. And again, he goes into that a little deeper. But what for you, Jim? What was a revelation from this book, if I can use that word in a biblical sense?
You know what? Here's my revelation. Spoiler alert. Unleashed in the East, he kind of goes into a little more detail of how that album was sort of put together. Like the music part of it was live, as we all know, but his vocals I thought he did sort of punch-ins, but he did the whole album in the studio. And he was man enough to admit that. And he said he did it in one take, so it had a sort of live feel to it. So that was kind of like a revelation that I already knew, but it was more detailed. So what about you?
Reading Heavy Duty KK's book and Confess, Rob's book, yes. I don't think I really grasped how long the conflict between Glenn and KK was going on for. I mean, it was basically from the very beginning. We always thought they were a tight band. They're sharing leads. These guys were a dynamic duo. Glenn's got, they're putting on the liner notes. Glenn plays this solo. KK was in the left side solo. Now they're playing harmony. And so they try to keep everything fair, which Rob, obviously being the third writing partner, he always tried to be completely neutral and fair. But it seems like there's a lot of conflict that was there for decades. Not just during the Nostradamus and the Epitaph touring years. I mean, this was stuff that was brewing for decades and decades. KK alludes to it, but I didn't realize it was, that strong for that long. So,
and you know what I like about Rob? He doesn't take sides. He kind of just says, this is the situation. This is how KK was feeling. This is how Glenn was feeling. These are the two type of characters. Glenn grew up from an upper middle class family, where KK grew up in a lower middle class family or a poor family.
With a very tough childhood. I mean, he goes into that in his book, Heavy Duty, right?
Yeah, and that reflects on the dynamic between them, right? And look, we're just giving you guys high level here. There's more details to what we're saying.
But the other thing too is, we get books like this. We read them. You have numerous books. I have numerous autobiographies of all our rock and roll heroes. And Rob's like, I don't read any of them. I live the life. I don't need to read about the Slashes or anybody else's book, right? So that was a little bit of a surprise, and that was understandably so. So
He talks about will KK be back in the band? And again, spoiler alert, he says it's kind of like a divorce, right? When people are saying, hey, you're divorced, but why don't you get back together with your wife? Sort of like it's just too difficult. But saying that, he's really happy that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that they will be sort of reunited and playing together. And I personally think that's going to spark something right there,
you
given the
know, I
fact that Glenn is not well.
one thing is, I read Ozzy Osbourne autobiography, and I was laughing out loud and like throughout the whole book, and Brian Johnson's first book, there's certain sections you just laugh out loud. In this book, it was really the stories about their first manager, Dave Corky Cork. That there was, I mean, you know, just a guy that was just doing his best, but quite an interesting fellow. And some of the stories that Rob tells in the book are very amusing and worth the read. So
I kind of like the guest list when he dedicate like he's dedicating chapters to the hotels, the parties, the image, the guest list, right? And it kind of brings us, because we get on the guest list on a lot of shows, right? And it kind of brings you, sort of shows you the other perspective or the other side of things. And it's cool how he sort of puts that all together and puts everything in perspective, that everybody wants to be on the guest list. Everybody wants to be backstage. He just, after a show, the last thing he wants to do is kind of, go around and talk to the record company people. He wants to talk to the fans who are waiting outside, and he loves to meet them and talk to them, right? At least that's what I got out of it. So,
Perrin asks a good question here. Anything in the
Perrin,
band's mindset around the turbo area, the synth sound, and touring with the likes of Doc and Bon Jovi and Cinderella? He talks about, he refers, like in Confess, he was just getting sober around that time. He went in with full of energy. It was a new sound that, they were always pushing the boundaries. And the Priest always did what they wanted. But no, not too much about the touring bands that they toured with. So,
but he does, and I said this before, he talks about a year ago, spoiler alert, he talks about a year ago when they said they would go out as a 4-piece and that it was his idea. And he thought he'd get a little backlash, but basically they crashed the internet with that idea. And they go, okay, let's go as 5. And it was actually, who was it? It was, who said it was a bad idea, or kind of alluded to as a bad idea? It
was Scott Travis, the
Scott
drummer, who
Travis.
said,
That's right.
"What?" He very succinctly said, "What do we gain from this?" And nobody had an answer of what they could gain, but everybody had an answer what they could possibly lose, which is the anger and frustration for a lot of their fans. So
They talk about the roadies, the job of the roadies and how hard they work and how unappreciative they are, right? And I like that bit. The tour managers, like you said, and the venues, the type of venues, and the better and the worse ones, and the small and the big, right?
And his
The
favorite bands are
lawyers.
going right back to the Beatles, right? And of course, Ronnie James Dio being one of his favorite singers, and what he listens to, what the Priest before they go on, it's always the same song. The little huddle they do, and just the traditions of being a touring band and on the road after all the 50 years. Let's face it, 50 years. So
Yeah.
lots of stories, lots of great anecdotes, and a lot of great insight of what it is to be a touring band and a band starting from scratch and working their way up to where they're considered a classic heavy metal, and it's still, and more important, like Rob says in the book, that they're still an active band, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Talks about a little bit Richie Faulkner and the concert
Falcon.
where he had the burst aorta, and after stage, like a lot of them were on the bus and didn't realize it was that serious until the next day. So
Any Richie Blackmore stories, Tanvir saying, everyone seems to have one. I do not recall a Richie Blackmore story.
that no, I don't.
But I do remember there was a mention of Todd LaTorre in this book. Did you
Yes.
Did you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
There you go. It's right there. So Todd LaTorre, if you're watching right before, you're probably at soundcheck now. You got to mention. Very cool. Very cool.
Call out to Todd LaTorre.
what else we got? We got Richie's heart attack, Glenn's Parkinson's, which was sort of sad in a way, right? To see such a legend sort of, hurt by this disease or sort of less active because of this disease, right? Um, he doesn't like supergroups. He does
Oh,
not like, and I think this goes back to the premise of this book, sort of band 101. You start off in a garage, you kind of work together as a gang and you kind of make it and you pay your dues, right? Whereas supergroup, they have no dues to pay. They just have these names and they've already established themselves. So they never seem to work out. I thought that was pretty cool and
well, and
interesting.
like he alludes to a lot of time the egos come into their band and they're each come in with their own manager, and it's hard to get that to be a cohesive unit afterwards a lot of the time. So
Yeah. So definitely from what we're saying in, I don't know, what we've been talking now for 15 minutes, it'll take you, a few days to read this. So
I
there's
couldn't put it
some sort
down,
of
Jim.
average.
I think it took me
It's a
less
long book
than
too.
a week to read that. So probably 4 days.
Yeah. That's about it,
I caught
Alan.
it.
I mean, does anybody else out there have any questions? Nostradamus. Siegel saying, I absolutely love Nostradamus. I think there was a bit about Nostradamus in
Yeah,
there. Do you remember?
he wanted to, turn this into a full Broadway production, right? I mean, he's still hoping that that would happen. And I mean, I love that album too. I think it's a super underrated album. It's an interesting listen. I recommend anybody going back and listening to it again. Priest always did what they wanted. They sometimes some things work, some things work a little less, but at least they didn't answer anybody and they did what they wanted to do. And Nostradamus was there was two choices, right, Jim? Bill Kerbishley said it's time that you guys do your own kind of Quadrophenia, your own Tommy.
Yes, yes.
And the first one, I forget what the first
I
subject
forget what
was,
it
but
was
they all
too.
passed on it. They said Nostradamus, something they could sink their teeth into. So
And he does talk about how he'd like to see before he retires Nostradamus as a sort of a concept on stage, right? Like the whole album. But I think he's spoken about that in the past. Okay, BFGS is saying any talk about Dave Holland and his prison time. The the only mention I remember was Dave Holland, how he got upset that there were drum machines sort of taking
yeah,
over
and
his
ram it down.
role on Ram It Down. So he did talk about that. And he kind of said, I think he kind of went away from that. And I don't blame him. You don't want to get tied into that
No, there's
prison.
no
And
mention of that whatsoever. I mean, he was just talking about Dave and his time in the band.
yeah,
When
yeah,
it was relatable to whatever that chapter was about, right? He does talk about lead singer disease. He talks about guitar players. He talks about bass players. Then he talks about drummers. So when he
yes,
talks about drummers, he goes all the way through from Les Binks and then was it John Hinch originally, all the
yeah.
way up to Scott Travis. So of course Dave Holland's mentioned there, but really nothing about his personal life, really just him inside the band. He does bring up one funny story about Dave. Was Dave bought a hotel and he asked everybody to squirrel away their shampoo and their soaps. Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Sorry. There's while they were touring with Judas Priest, they could all save their hotel amenities so that they can give it to Dave so that he can fill up his hotel when they got back to
Time for your
from
saying,
touring. So
spill the beans. What's the funniest story in the book?
it would be their first road manager. Uh, they played a trick on him, and just the stuff that he would do on a little bit of an odd fellow, but just the stuff he would do. That's the stuff that made me literally laugh out loud. So I
Nice.
won't get into it. We don't want to spoil too much. Just that section of the book is quite hilarious, in fact. So
Yeah, that's about it. If anybody else has a last question,
he's a big Spinal Tap fan, probably because Spinal Tap as a movie is very relatable to any touring band.
that's
Still
right.
is.
That's right.
So he brings a lot of references to Spinal Tap.
And he does say how he'd like Priest to have a Vegas residency. Uh, you could read the book more about that, but I think that's a pretty cool idea. Sort of now that they're getting a little older and they have to fly everywhere and it's more difficult, maybe if they're stationary someplace, they could, be more sort of more comfortable, less stressed, and just, do the shows, say 2, 3 times a week. And, fans will, travel to Vegas to watch them, right? Or anywhere
You,
else.
he brings up how how his voice has changed over the years, and he has to ease into certain songs and sing certain songs certain ways because of the aging. Obviously, he's in his 70s, and if anybody's seen Priest recently, he's still unbelievable. And costume changes when he's on stage, how he walks about. He's not dancing anymore all over the stage. He kind of lurches a little bit, but again, he's in his 70s, and he's open about it. Very down to earth, very honest book, I would say. Not hiding anything, just being truthful about where they started, how they started, what he lived, and where he's at now, and what he's able and not able to do.
So I would personally say that I like this book better than his last book. A lot of people are saying, oh, another book, another book. This book is so worth it, especially if you want to know the ins and outs of everything in the music industry. And I think Rob is the perfect guy after 50 years to tell everybody what it's all about, exposed. And not to say I hated his last book, but I like this one better. That's all I'm trying to say. Makes a perfect Christmas gift or holiday gift or Hanukkah gift or whatever you're celebrating. There you go. Alan, last note. It's released today, by the way. It's released today.
Today's the first day. Like I said, we've been biting our tongues, trying not to talk about it. And today we're free. We're finally out of the cage. We can talk about it. Again, it's a thoroughly enjoyable book. So,
all right, that's it, Alan.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. And by the way, Sword interview. It's an interview report.
Stay tuned.
Interview report coming out Thursday. It's this mass production that we did. We went to the House of Rock, and Alan did this massive interview with the band. I did a little goofing around, but it's ready to go Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch the Sword interview / report at the House of Rock. All right, this Thursday.
In anticipation of their long-awaited third album.
That's right.
Third studio album, I should say.
Third studio album. All right. Oh, here we go. We got a last question here. Merciful Fate interview. That question has been going on and on and on. If it happens, it happens. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Have yourself a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in.